Hi everybody, I'm Grace, and I hope you've come to the right page. Welcome to this conversation with Scott Kiloby. Hi Scott.
Hello, Grace, and everybody.
So Scott was a lawyer, became a spiritual teacher after his awakening experience, and then he turned into an addiction counselor. And he's running a center for recovery from addictions now. So Scott is it's kind of normal for spiritual teachers to have a life before they become spiritual teachers, but it's kind of unusual, and I think just incredibly interesting that somebody who was a spiritual teacher then starts doing something much more practical. So that's why the title to this conversation is Love Gone Practical. And I'm just very happy to speak to Scott. So welcome again, Scott.
Thank you, Grace.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah. So Scott, maybe you could just start by telling us a little bit how this happened, how life got you to go there, how this transition or this transformation happened for you.
Sure. Well, the first thing I want to say is the Kiloby Center, which is where I do the work now, is not just an addiction treatment center. We work with anxiety, depression. Spiritual seekers come there. We're certified by the state of California as an addiction treatment center, but that's just our certification. We also work with a lot of, at any given time, we're working with people with all sorts of issues, not just addiction. Yeah, it's a long story. I'll try to keep it somewhat short. You mean, how did I get to working with addiction? That part of it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different reasons for it, probably too many to name. But the main ones are that the idea of having a center, whether it's an addiction center or just a center, seemed really interesting because I noticed that people need support through any process. And I was doing a lot of the kind of the weekend talks, which there's definitely benefits of those, or even retreats. But sometimes people need follow-up support afterwards. So the idea of having a center, a fixed location, provides that ongoing support for people. Why an addiction center? Well, because I spent so many years in addiction to drugs and alcohol and so many other things. So it's definitely my experience. And so being able to, there's so many facets to addiction and also anxiety and depression. There's so many facets to it that to be able to work with people on a daily way, on an ongoing way, really can help to deal with all of those facets. And that's really the reason that I came into that, because I wanted to take the whole conversation into a deeper realm and also a more practical realm, so that it's open not just to spiritual seekers, but to anyone, anywhere who's experiencing addiction, OCD, depression, anxiety.
Yeah. So that's something that I hadn't quite realized, that your center, I mean, the mission of the center was much broader than just dealing with addiction. But then recently, you also published a little video clip. It was just 1.5 minutes, and it just struck me that it got to the heart of the human condition, which is somewhat addictive, just by talking about what is addiction and what is recovery, in a beautiful soundbite of 1.5 minutes. And so maybe you could share that understanding with us, because that's, I think that's just the best way to I mean, to me, it just struck me as really true and helpful. And I sent it to a client of mine who's working with her own addiction right now, and she was quite grateful, and actually ended up going to your site and ordering your book. So why don't you share that with us?
Sure. It's a video series called Evolving Our Perspective Around Addiction. So you saw one of the videos. There's about 10 of them coming out. That one just deals with what is addiction and recovery. So the way I like to talk about it is I kind of like to throw out all of the scientific and the medical definitions. Not that they don't have value, but I want to speak to people's actual experience day by day. And addiction for me is sort of really kind of a hard wiring to escape, avoid, and change our present experience, whether it be because we are feeling sad, angry, shameful, boredom, restlessness, any of that. So our natural kind of desire to change our thoughts and change our feelings. And then with substances, we do that. With substances, we ingest things and activities. We get busy to try to change or numb out. So recovery to me would be about fully allowing our entire experience as it is, moment by moment, which includes all of the thoughts, the sensations, and the emotions and experiences, to fully allow that. And because we're not taught to do that when we're kids, it does take some skillful means to learn how to do that and to adjust our perception that way. So really, just in a very, very basic sense, addiction is about escaping and changing. Recovery is about acceptance and fully allowing everything to be as it is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that makes a beautiful connection, you know, from addiction to really the human condition, to what we're all dealing with. You know, what's basically the setup of the animal machine, you know, which is that we're able to run from things. And so we will, you know. And that's like the way we function until we realize that's the way we function. And you know, some go to great lengths in doing this by taking drugs, by taking substances, but all of us do that all the time in less obvious ways. But so until we realize that that's what we're doing, we're stuck in that.
Yeah, and part of that video series is that we want, because it's all about broadening this discussion of addiction. You know, we often still think about it as drugs and alcohol, but if we think about it more broadly as escape and trying to constantly change our experience, you know, that is a much broader application. And we do that in various ways, even with things like Facebook or internet work, caffeine,
Yes.
spiritual seeking, self-improvement. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly what struck me so much, was that you were able to just with that way of talking about it, you were able to make the link to the kind of escaping that we all do, you know, and drugs is just one more visible way of doing so, but you know, we're all doing it. Unless we stop.
Right. And it's the possibility of stopping, which is the good news. I mean, the possibility of that. And it's not, you know, it really does take support. People need support in that. Usually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Scott, let me just take a minute to check on the YouTube page whether people have joined us. Yes, I think some have joined us. So yeah, they're coming here. So wonderful. So welcome everybody. Again, yeah, sorry about the technical glitch, but So just to fill you in, we were talking about um, Scott's definition of addiction, which is really escaping what is there, and recovery, which is to come back to, or to be able to be with what is there. So right now we're with the fact that we had this technical glitch and people have missed maybe the beginning of what we were talking about. So Scott, how do you work with people? I know you use what you've developed yourself, which is the living inquiries. Maybe you could just describe them very simply to people who don't know them.
Yeah, very simply, it's a mindfulness approach. This is a simple way to explain it. But what it does is it has us observe the words, pictures, and bodily energies, which are sensations and emotions, to observe them and ask certain questions about them that help show you that, for example, when you think that there's an urge to take heroin there, but when you examine it with the right question, when you're just observing the words, pictures, and sensations, you can't actually find the urge. The urge is not findable in your experience, and that helps you then to fully allow whatever's happening, including the deep sensations. And then also, that's the compulsion inquiry. It deals with anything that we're seeking outside of ourselves, a compulsion or addiction. And we essentially have people look for the urge or the command or the drive, and then in being with everything as it is, and then in also not being able to find it in their experience, that they can have a relaxation of the compulsion. The other part of it is the anxiety, the fear, the sense of threat that people experience. Anxiety is, for us, is tightly bound to addiction. At the center, we talk about them together. Anxiety is the way that we reject or resist in a fight, flight, or freeze way our experience, perceiving a threat from other people, a threat from our thoughts, our feelings, a threat from boredom, a threat in just being here now, threats of all kinds. So we have people look for the threat or the danger in the same way, this unfindability way. We actually just we say, for example, is that picture that you see in your mind, is that the threat? And then we bring them into their body, and we look at words, pictures, and sensations. So they're with everything as it is, and then in not finding the threat, the anxiety can begin to relax. And then the third way, the third inquiry is the unfindable inquiry, and it's generally used on the self-identity. So people come with a sense that they are broken, that they are a loser, that they are not good enough, some self-identity. And through the same way of observing words, pictures, and sensations and being with them exactly as they are, they come to see that identity is not findable, in the sense that that's not who they are. So that's kind of Buddha's three pillars, if you will. Fear or aversion, desire, which is the compulsion, and then ignorance, which is the misperceiving of who we are. So we work with all three of those together. And then so what does that bring about? It brings about simply being more present and awake in the moment, and buying less and less into the compulsive thoughts, the anxious thoughts, and the identity thoughts that are driving it all.
Yeah. You have such a gift for making things simple and clear, Scott. It's just so beautiful. I love it.
Thank you.
So let me ask you something. I'll give you an example that just happened leading up to this conversation today. I still get nervous before these things, and so it kind of appears as a kind of physical tension, and started getting a bit kind of worked up, and And of course, that's unpleasant. And so, today I thought, okay, I have my usual strategies, of course. But today I thought, okay, well, let me just sit down and not escape or not kind of pretend it's not happening, which is one of my escapes. Just focus on what I need to do. So I thought, okay, I'll sit down and I'll just feel what's there. And very quickly, I didn't do anything. I just allowed the tension to be, to allowed myself to feel the tension. And as I was doing this, it just turned into such sweetness. And, life just is so sweet. And so to me, that when I sit with whatever it is that happens, usually very quickly, it kind of just dissipates. It just kind of goes and gives way to something that is just beingness, just appreciation of what is. So how is that different from the kinds of things that you're teaching people to do?
The thing is the living inquiries are only a part of what we do.
Mm-hmm.
So they're a systematic approach that we use to go very deep into the thoughts, emotions, and sensations. But probably 70% of what we do is showing people how to sit with things in skillful ways.
Mm-hmm.
So it's and because they hear a lot about the living inquiries with my work, people think that that's what we're doing all the time at the center, and it's just not like that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, for us here at the center and the facilitators that do this work online, a lot of times it's just helping people be with experience again in a skillful way. A skillful way means there are ways that you can show people to be with things that do not create more suffering, because like on the bodily level, I've always felt like for myself and then for people that I've worked with that there's this underlying programming that says this sensation or feeling should go away.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's a loud thought that says that, but sometimes it's more like a radio station playing so far in the background of that it's unconscious or unheard.
Yeah.
But it's like having a certain disposition towards a sensation.
Yeah.
And you have to kind of show people how to be with that sensation that in a way that's aware of that
Mm-hmm.
programming. Otherwise, the programming continues to operate as they sit with everything. So a lot of what we do from the very beginning is skills training, teaching people to begin to notice the disposition that wants to change things.
Mm-hmm.
We have ways of working with that so that the disposition starts to change, so that when they're really sitting with something, they're really, really sitting with it in a way that isn't trying to change or improve it or make it go away. And then paradoxically, that's what allows it to shift.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, energetically, the moment you stop resisting something, it'll change. It'll move on to whatever. And it's actually the resistance that makes it stay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's in fact the living inquiries are all about that also. They're just a systematic way of kind of looking into your experience in a very precise, fine-tuned way. But a lot of the stuff that we do that's not the inquiry work at the center is, again, a lot like what you're saying. It's like, because when you turn towards something instead of away from it, it tends not to be able to stick around.
Yes.
It's the turning away in various ways that keep things feeling solid and sticky.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's that movement of turning away, that's the escape, and that can take the form of various addictions if it becomes a pattern in somebody's life.
Yeah, I mean, there's a multitude of ways of turning away. I mean, but I used to notice, I could almost see it happening. In my experience, if there was an uncomfortable sensation, I would notice myself on the internet,
Mm-hmm.
and just kind of just looking for something just to entertain me, and
Mm-hmm.
noticing the correlation between that activity and the sensation, almost as if somewhere in the program of the body had a way of just saying, I'm going to protect you from
Mm-hmm.
having to feel this. So you're going to get really busy for a moment.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
but after a while, you start to notice the different ways of being distracted. And what I found is we start to notice that they ultimately don't work because they simply cover up the experience of the pain.
Yes.
And then once you become ready to look at the pain, it's a totally different shift in perception that can happen.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's not always clean. It's not like you
Mm-hmm.
just sort of learn something or have an insight, and then from then on you completely allow everything to be. It's a matter of being conscious in the moment of seeing the different ways of distraction and noticing that happening, and noticing when you're not ready to sit with something. That sometimes it's just noticing that you're not ready,
Mm-hmm.
and then when you are ready to sit with something, doing it skillfully and
Mm-hmm.
in a way that really does meet it directly.
Yes. So when you say you've used that word a few times, doing it skillfully, what do you mean by that? What is it to be skillfully aware of
I
something
think
or
that the way
skillfully
that we
turning towards something?
it's the word that we use to get people into the conversation about the velcro effect in our work. The velcro
Mm-hmm.
effect is the experience of words and mental pictures feeling stuck to sensations.
Mm-hmm.
And you can obviously, so that's where our suffering lies. If I have the thought I'm a bad person in words, and then I have a feeling with it, there's nothing particularly unskillful about just meeting that, because just if you can just meet that as it is, it can be seen through.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes you can show people, and even for us, it's an even more skillful way, is to really meet each thing individually to see the difference between the quality of the words, difference between that and the quality of the sensation, and how, in a sense, they're two different elements of your experience, and then to meet just the sensation by itself in a way that doesn't have any words on it. And
Mm-hmm.
that's one way of being skillful. Another way is that because of body memory, so if I have a very deep contraction in my stomach that's involved with stress and control and drive, you know, um, one can think that they're meeting it skillfully just by sitting with it, but there can be all sorts of unexamined, unconscious ideas and beliefs that are kind of rolled up into the sensation, velcroed to it. So one way of skillfully meeting that is just noticing what's tied to it, and meeting each thing, whether you're doing it through inquiry or just noticing, and being able to pull out exactly what are the ideas and the beliefs that are tied up to that
Mm-hmm.
sensation, and learning a skillful way of being with all that, so that you eventually get to be with just the sensation without all the memory, the words, and the pictures, which allows it to move more. That's just another way. And the other skillful way, just one of many ways, is understanding that we're all programmed to want to change our experience. And then, so if you go into this kind of work, kind of not being aware of how that programming is operating in your life, it can be really frustrating to do this work, to not know that there's really a background instruction all the time going on that says
Mm-hmm.
this needs to go away. This
Yes.
needs to, so skillfully meeting and dealing with that programming in a way so that you can quiet it, and then really start to meet things without that programming so much.
Mm-hmm. Mm. So isn't seeing that programming of not wanting to feel, wanting to get away, isn't that in a way the most important thing?
It is for addiction, and I would say it is for a lot of things too. Yes. Yeah, that seems to be a big part of it. There's a lot of important parts of it, but that's to me, a big part of it, especially when it comes to bodily sensations that are uncomfortable, and
Mm-hmm.
painful, certainly.
Yes.
And even thoughts, though. I mean, we want to have better thoughts or different thoughts. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's a big part of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But it's probably true that even the thoughts that are unpleasant or uncomfortable, they usually come with a physical contraction. And
Yeah.
that's what's uncomfortable, and that's what we want to get away from.
And that's what we call the velcro effect. It's
Mm-hmm.
just our word for it, but it's exactly that. Because one thing I'll do at the center with people is I'll say, if you look at a box of tissue as a mental picture, unless you have some traumatic association with that picture, it's going to feel rather neutral in your body.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at a picture of a traumatic event from your childhood, that's going to feel different in your body.
Mm-hmm.
And just starting to notice that how certain thoughts feel different and how are velcroed and feel different in your body can start to wake you up to becoming more aware of what's happening in the body when you're thinking and being
Mm-hmm.
with what's happening in the body more directly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So, Scott, how um, how do you feel? I mean, I totally get what you're talking about, and I'm sure a lot of people will. So, my question to you would also be, how does this spiritual awakening that happened in your life, how does that flow into the much more practical work that you do? How do you see that happening for yourself? I mean, how, you know, it's my question isn't very clear, but it's like, something changed in your life. You tried to you were communicating that in a certain way, as spiritual teachers usually do through, satsangs, retreats. And now you do this, and how this much more practical work. So how do you see that spiritual understanding coming in for you?
In many ways, the first one that comes up to me is that I was different in terms of being a spiritual teacher. I was different in the sense that, yes, I did talks and retreats, but the majority of what I did were private sessions for years, thousands of private sessions.
Mm-hmm.
What I learned is that it's really hard to have a one-size-fits-all instruction for everybody that sort of
Mm-hmm.
fits, because our experience is so varied. So what I learned in those sessions is you have to meet each client where they are and find out exactly what's going on. It became harder and harder for me to just speak generally about human experience. There are certain things you can say about human experience. For example, if you meet something directly, that's better than avoiding. That's a general thing.
Mm-hmm.
But how someone is actually meeting the experience and what's happening in their mind and in their body and their disposition towards that thing is a really individual thing. And so I just, through the years doing the sessions, I learned it was harder and harder, and actually sometimes dangerous, to talk about it in generalities. It was better to meet people where they are one-on-one.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that I learned from my own experience, because my own experience of the whole awakening process was really meeting my particular experience as it was. You can
Yes.
trust the spiritual teachings because they're helpful, but at some ways you have to go and find out what's happening in your own experience, the uniqueness of that. And that that's one of the main things. There are lots of other things, like, for example, when I'm sitting with people, more and more I don't get a sense that there's something wrong with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what the spiritual awakening process has given me more than anything else, is when someone's sitting in front of me, I don't have that belief that they are broken. I understand that they have that belief sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't have that belief, there's less and less or no agenda. And if there is an agenda for me, I can look at it. But when you meet somebody without an agenda, it sometimes just means you're sitting quietly with them.
Mm-hmm.
You're not doing anything but maybe some very gentle, simple guidance.
Mm-hmm.
People experience that, they feel that, they don't feel judged, they don't feel labeled, or we're not placing a diagnosis on them, a diagnosis. We're not being a force outside of them that seems to make them want to change.
Yes.
So that allows them to rest and meet their experience more.
Yeah.
That's probably the biggest thing for my own um, freedom, if you will, that's helped me
Mm.
in the work I'm doing. now.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Thanks, God. Because you know what just came to me is um, when you have an agenda, which most counselors and no, I shouldn't say that, but which can be there in counselors or people who work with people, in helping professions. It's like you activate the part of the client or the energy in the client that has an agenda for that client, i.e., the super ego that tells the client, you should be doing this, you should change, you should sit with your experience, you should. And so being with somebody without an agenda and seeing even, sometimes I sit with people and I just see the beauty that's there, just waiting to be discovered, that's kind of obscured in a way. But even the beauty of that unfolding of how they're going to find their own beauty, how they're going to find the peace that is there, that's always been there. And when you sit with them holding that, it's like they can sink into that themselves.
Yeah, it's a huge topic. I mean, it's a big thing. We do continuing ed for counselors and therapists in this area from a mindfulness approach. So the counselors and therapists will come to our center, and the next one we're doing is actually on being present with clients. And
Yeah.
some of them are somewhat aware of that and are naturally doing that, and a lot of them it's a new topic for them
Hmm.
because of their conditioning. Their education told them, they diagnose the client, uh,
Yeah.
help them improve, send the signal that they need to change. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's a constant topic among myself and our facilitators that work online of
Hmm.
being with people exactly where they are, and then it's something that we're doing here at the center with other folks. But yeah, like you said best, a client can feel it. They can sense, and if they already have the idea that there's something deeply wrong with them and that they need to change their experience, and then they're getting it from the very person who's there to try to help them,
Yeah.
it's adding to that conditioning, or it
Mm.
can.
Hmm.
Yeah, and that makes it hard for them to meet their experience as it is, because there's
Yes.
all sorts of judgments floating about their experience.
Yeah.
That it's not right, that it should be different.
Hmm. And it's just, in a way, it's just more things to do to get away from that experience, right? It turns kind of any form of counseling or therapy or healing into more things to do instead of just an ability to receive what is there.
I don't want to say that every form of counseling, because I do know some that really do meet clients, but a large, but many forms of counseling and therapy do send that signal to
Yeah,
clients.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a delicate thing because at the same time, you know, when clients are not ready to meet things clearly, often it actually is helpful to have tools. So it is helpful to have something to do that kind of, and I think that's where your inquiries come in, that kind of allow them to come to that experience with more ease.
Yeah, it does. Sometimes people need that. They need some sort of systematic way of looking at their experience that eases them into being with what is,
Yeah.
because that's where they came. They came from the conditioning of doing. But the inquiries are a kind of doing that undoes the doing,
Yes.
if it works right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. A doing that undoes the doing that's a getting away from.
Yeah,
the experience.
right.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about one other thing around just addiction because I think your listeners who are experiencing addiction can relate to it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, with addiction, there's obviously the craving or the desire for whatever it is. But what we found a lot lately is the more that we focus on the aversion part, the more the cravings relax. And this is not totally new, um, not a new idea,
Mm-hmm.
um, but the way that we're working with it is new. Um, and I first started to notice it, and so do some of my facilitators, that with, for example, sex addiction,
Mm-hmm.
it's not just about having a desire for pornography or sex. It's not that simple. There's an identity often behind it, and an aversion towards the activity. So, for example, as Greg Askew, one of my facilitators, says, okay, if a man or a woman is watching a lot of pornography or engaging in unhealthy, obsessive sex acts,
Mm-hmm.
um, our culture is telling that person in many different ways that you're wrong,
Mm-hmm.
that you're bad. So
Mm-hmm.
that becomes internalized, and so people can feel as if they are dirty, wrong, bad, shameful. And so what Greg says is what do dirty, wrong, shameful, and bad people do? They watch more porn.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's like a cycle that repeats itself.
Yeah.
So that's the aversion part of it. There's like an identity of shame or wrong or bad, which creates an aversion towards the act of
Mm-hmm.
sex. Sex is then wrong, and I'm doing a lot of it, and that fuels the craving itself, the desire itself. Okay, so but we also see it with food, a lot with food and drugs and alcohol. For example, it's not just that people with food addictions want to eat a lot of food. It's not that simple.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
that there's a judgment, a deep judgment about their and almost like an aversive relationship against the food, so that when they eat, they feel guilty, or there's a judgment about the food and about themselves, which creates an identity,
Mm-hmm.
which creates negative thoughts and feelings. And then what do you do with those negative thoughts and feelings? You eat more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what we're doing is we're really, really working on the aversion side of things. We're working on just this part, and we've seen sometimes that when people can meet the shameful feelings and thoughts directly, they can meet the self-judgment directly, they can meet the feelings of being bad or wrong directly, and then they move through those naturally. In many respects, the addictive part of it begins to relax. And that's not always obvious. I mean, it's obvious because when we hear it, we understand it makes sense, but it's not always obvious when we're trying to recover from addiction to focus in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're often thinking, I need to stop the behavior, or I
Yes.
need to do something to quiet the craving, without recognizing this other component.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, that is so true because as long as that other component is there, it drives the addictive behavior
Yeah, definitely.
or drives, it drives the whole cycle um, of, of feeling bad and going for the addiction and feeling worse. And yeah, it seems to just be a kind of, a cycling in that.
Yeah, we definitely see it a lot here at the center, actually.
Mm.
Yeah, that cycle is operating with people, and that we have to deal with the whole cycle, and not just the
Mm-hmm.
craving for alcohol. You know.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, and in fact, the other little video that you've put out there is actually on shame, which I thought was quite beautiful too. And if people wonder where to find them, you can go to, I think the Scott Kiloby Facebook site has them.
The best place to find them would be the Kiloby Center YouTube channel, but we also post them on social media, like the Kiloby Center Facebook page, actually, and the
All right.
Kiloby Center Google Plus page. Those are the places where you would see them posted more than on the Scott Kiloby Facebook page.
Okay. 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 And actually, I just want to acknowledge, since you're talking about the center, Scott had to go to the center today to do this conversation because his internet connection at home is not good enough. So he hasn't had weekends off for quite a while, and so this is one of the first weekends he has had off, and he had to go into the center anyway to do this conversation today. So thank you, Scott, for coming out there and
My pleasure.
being with us. Yeah. So Scott, I want to just because I love talking about love, I want to bring in love. For me, in my experience, when I'm really with things, with my own experience, with people, with whatever is happening, often there is this, there's this flavor of love. That's what beingness seems to often have for me. And in your more spiritual teacher phase, you were talking about love too, or you wrote a book about relationships. I can't remember all of it. My memory is not that good these days, but I just wonder whether you could comment on that. Where is love for you in this work that you do? I know it's like, in recovery circles or, addiction counseling and stuff, this is probably not a word that's used very much, but you're with a different audience today, so you can use it. It's not a dirty word.
No, it's not a dirty word at all. And I have written a book about it, more than one book actually.
Yeah.
Maybe the best way is the way you've already said it, that in when we meet each other fully aware of all the things in our experience that would try to divide us, the thoughts and the feelings that would try so hard to divide us, like like if I sat here and I felt unsafe with you, that's really something that I would have to meet directly, the anxiety of that before, because if until I do, it's not going to feel so loving. I might there's going to be a wall of separation there.
Yeah.
Or also other identities that we carry with us in the relationship. So, like you say, meeting all of that directly, and then what opens up is a more of an unfiltered experience of connection between people and presence, which is hard to put a word on, but it's certainly different than I think that the way our culture talks about love, and you see it in the movies. I was at the Cinema Diverse, the gay film festival in Palm Springs yesterday, and the way that love is often characterized in film is either it's sexualized, in other words, I love you and I'm in love with you and I'm sexually attracted to you, or or it's I love you because you agree with me, like you have a similar mindset than mine, therefore I love you, but I don't love the people that don't agree with me, So all those things all those things are met, and we kind of realize that it's not really ultimately about agreement and disagreement, and it's certainly not about sex and romance, although that's a kind of love that we can have. It's about meeting our experience. If on some level I don't like my experience, if I don't like or love, if I can't be with this feeling that's here, or these thoughts, it's going to be hard to feel love when I'm with you. If I'm rejecting my inner experience in some way, my so-called outer experience will be rejected on some level. So I feel like the more that we love, and love is a word, I don't know, allow, first of all, allow our experience to be as it is and meet it directly, the easier it is to talk about love in this other way, which is, it's more natural than love that's natural, that it's a hard topic to talk about, but it's a felt experience.
Yes.
more than anything. It's a felt experience that when things have cleared away and or things are met directly as they arise.
Yes, that's just an openness for what's there in oneself and in the other. And it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be kind of very romantic or very emotional. In fact, it often is quite neutral, but it's it's open.
Simple.
And it has a subtle quality of love, embracing.
Yes.
Mm. Yeah. So I wonder whether that's a good time to maybe look at the YouTube comments. And just to say for people who probably haven't heard that because you weren't there at the beginning, if you would like to come on to the Hangout, I saw on the old YouTube page that some people posted their email address to come on to the Hangout. Please do it on the current YouTube comment thread because, I can't handle going to old pages and stuff. So if you'd like to come on to the Hangout to speak with Scott directly or ask him a question, try posting your email address and I'll send an invitation to the Hangout to that email address and you should find the link to join the Hangout there. So I'm just gonna, Scott, I'm going to give you a break and just look at the comments on the page. So far I don't actually, let me refresh this page.
Someone did email me, and one of the questions that they had was, how can they find more about what I do? So let me just give some of the website addresses, if you don't mind. She's asking.
Sure, yes, go ahead.
So the Kiloby Center is kilobicenter.com, and we're redeveloping that site to make it more user-friendly within the next week, kilobicenter.com. The addiction work, general addiction work is Natural Rest for Addiction, naturalrestforaddiction.com. And the easiest way to say it is Kiloby.com is the portal to everything that I do. If you go to Kiloby.com, it leads you to the Kiloby Center. It leads you to information about the living inquiries and about everything else. So Kiloby.com is the easiest way to explain the portal, or I mean to get to the resources.
Okay, great, thanks. I just found one address. So Nishkala, I'm sending an invitation to you. Whoops. No, that wasn't it. Please bear with me. This is the first time I'm actually doing this. So, okay. All right. So, Nishkala, I sent you an invitation. I know there was somebody else. I'll try and find that address on the old site, the old page. Yes, there's also Doreen Palmer. Okay. All right, so that's the two people that I could find. I sent you invitations. If you'd like to come on, just let me know now. And yes, Esther says, can you write your address here? Yes, you can. Nishkala says she doesn't have a question right now. So, is there anything else that you would like to talk about, Scott?
One thing that does pop up is, while we're waiting on questions, is that some people, when they're doing these kinds of this kind of work, especially if they're not supported in an ongoing way by others who've kind of done the work, they can get into a really dark place. It's been called like the dark night of the soul or spiritual emergencies. Yeah, the thing I would just say about that is if that's going on for you, get into a community that provides support for that, ongoing support. I would say be careful of simply just doing a sort of drive-by with something. In other words, if you stick with somebody who's been through it and who can support you all the way through that process. We have facilitators that do that, but there are other organizations out there. One that I'm thinking of is like Waking Down. Other ones like Balanced View. We do that at the inquiries. I like those organizations that provide the ongoing support because that can be a very scary thing that happens. When something sort of falls apart, life circumstances change because as a result of really meeting things. You know, you can be in one moment think that you know exactly where you're going in life and be sort of driven towards one direction, and then all of a sudden all of that just doesn't make any sense and you're not really sure. That's one thing that can happen. Another sense is just, quite honestly, fear and panic around existential issues can pop up. Also, trauma, if someone experienced deep trauma as a childhood and they begin to meet everything, that can come to the surface in ways that are exaggerated and, and painful, scary. So I would just, also with addictions, I've seen people have spiritual realizations, have experiences where they really open, and then all of a sudden they find themselves deeply, again, addicted to something they were addicted to before. They relapse on alcohol after years of sobriety. I like the idea of a community and ongoing support to help people kind of navigate through those experiences, instead of just people on their own out there trying to make sense of it. We work with people at the center, obviously, in an ongoing way, but there are definitely other ways to do that.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely good to get support when you need it. And my sense is also sometimes actually life is quite gentle, it takes people in a way into being with themselves that's very gradual, and it brings up what can be handled. But sometimes there's definitely a need for ongoing support also. It's just good to know the difference.
Yeah, I'm really talking about the people being rushed to there was a girl that got rushed to the hospital, for example. Another guy who thoughts of killing himself. Another girl who relapsed. In every one of those situations, it was because they didn't have support, and those are extreme cases that I'm talking about. And
Yes.
I would not advise to deal with that alone. Any of that.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. So just to say, Esther, that I sent you an invitation that you should be able to respond to. Scott, I still don't see any questions. But there's another person who wanted to get invited. And Klaus Concept says, hello to all from Austria. Great respect and love, Klaus. Hello, Klaus. I hope you're doing well. So I don't know this email invitation thing is working all that well, but keep checking your email, Esther, to see whether you received the invitation. The other two people don't seem to want to come on again anymore. Yes, so Scott, you're obviously dealing with some quite extreme cases. So maybe you could also tell us, in those extreme situations, which is what people are really afraid of happening, how can they be supported?
In those breakthrough experiences or those traumatic things that come up, if the old conditioning that's operating that says avoid, 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 um, and they haven't kind of learned how to skillfully be with things, in those big moments where something awful is happening, you know, it's not obvious to be with something for them always. It's not obvious, even as for us, you and I, Grace, we've been doing this work a while. It's obvious that that's the answer, but it isn't always obvious for people. It's without support. Um, just gentle guidance saying just holding the space for that to happen.
Yeah,
Can
because
be really important.
there's a lot of fear that it's just too much. It's
Yeah.
unbearable.
Yeah, and that's really I'm talking about those cases where it's not obvious that the answer is to be with, or maybe not knowing how to be with it. When we say be with, that's very general, and there are people who will sit in it, wallowing in the thoughts and the feelings, and will think that they're being with it in the way that we're talking about. We're really not talking about that. So, we're not talking about simply thinking about it all the time, whatever it is.
Yes.
And people might misinterpret that, and think, well, I've been with it. I've been with it for a week, So that kind of support is needed. Because when you're really, really in pain, or you're really, really experiencing a strong desire to relapse, almost everything that you know about being with something can be thrown out the window in those moments. Just the old system, the old operating system is back. Kind of escape, avoid, and whatever else. And that's why I think support is helpful. But I mean, generally, no. I mean, support is you use it only as you need it. I mean, if you know how to be with things, just be with things as they arise, and life gives you what you need to look at.
Yeah. And it may also helpful to realize that the fear of things being unmanageable or too much, or the sense of things being too much, is also something that you can sit with. That can be received too. That can be, that can be held.
Yeah, I mean, one of the ways that we work with that, well, first of all, is just to hold it like you're saying. But we might say, where is the too much? So we might pull those words up and say, are the words actually it? And they might say yes because they feel something again. So then we bring them to the sensation without those words. It's amazing just to feel a sensation without the label on it. And that, again, is not something that people wouldn't necessarily know to do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so what does it feel like when I don't put those words on it? Now can I be with that? Um, and then maybe some more words come up, and we look at those. Are those words it? Is that the too much? Those words, and
Yes.
then kind of picking that apart.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's when it's helpful to have something to do, some method that kind of breaks that being present down for people into, more practical components almost.
Yeah, because I think that we, with our operating system, is not to be that aware. Our
Mm-hmm.
operating system normally is not to be that aware.
Mm-hmm.
To really be aware of the words, to really be aware of the pictures, to really be aware of the sensations is not how we were raised.
Yeah.
And that's why a systematic approach can be helpful sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So, Scott, I do see some questions now, so I'm just going to ask the first one. Actually, Esther says she misunderstood something. She doesn't have a question either, but she loves him anyway, and she's sending love from Hungary.
Hey, Hungry.
Hi,
Esther?
Esther. Esther, yes.
Yeah.
Wendy is asking a question. Do you have any comments on your experience of working with people addicted to street fentanyl, a powerful synthetic opioid? Thanks.
The fentanyl patch. I don't know if you can ask a follow-up question. Is that the patch?
I think that's what she's talking about, yeah.
Um, yes. And also heroin and other high-level opioids. Yeah, so but the key for us is the same, is that first there has to be detox. So there has to be a readiness to go through the detox. I mean, we would almost certainly not work with someone who was abusing the fentanyl. If someone was using it as prescribed and they needed to wean off during recovery, we might work with them under limited circumstances. But if you're talking about the case of abusing that, the first step is detox, whether medical detox or social detox or natural detox. You get that drug out of their system in a way that's comfortable, so that they're not completely writhing in pain during the whole time. And then deal with it in the way we deal with every other addiction. That they're all dealt with the same way. You know, universal mechanism of addiction um, is the same for most things. Some of the drugs are more powerful,
Mm-hmm.
which just means we may need more time with them, but it's essentially the same process.
Mm-hmm. That is a very interesting question, Scott. And let me just ask something back on that topic, because my sense is that, what I'm hearing you say is you work with every addiction in the same way, um, ultimately, but aren't there different flavors or different kinds of addiction, like the addiction to stimulants, for example, can be quite different from an addiction to um, things like, pot, which basically helps people relax and tune out. So, the stimulants are more to actually feel alive, and the the things like pot are more like about just relaxing and tuning out.
Yeah, we would deal with that differently, but one of the first things we want to do is to detox the person, to
Sure.
see what is the underlying issue. Why did they go to the drug in the first place? Maybe there was some anxiety
Mm-hmm.
that the marijuana helped with. Maybe there was some feeling that the speed is drowning out, or maybe there's a sense of lacking something that the speed or the meth or the crank gave them. And until we detox, we don't know. But yeah, we would meet each person differently.
Right.
And there are universal aspects to all the addictions that are, yeah, they're both. It's both.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks. Yeah. Um, I can see both. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Sebastian asks, Scott mentioned earlier working with fear. Are there any other tips about facing one's demons?
You know, obviously, just what we've already talked about being with is this a central thing, is to rest and let things be as they are consciously. One of the things that we work with, I'll get into the inquiry, the anxiety inquiry that we do in a second. I've already talked a little bit about that. But mostly what we find is that if we turn away from something, if we turn away from a thought, like a thought, a mental picture, for example, of a plane crash. Let's say we have this real desperate fear of a plane crash, or even of death or something. There's an image or a set of words in our experience that we just will not look at because it seems like it's too much. The first thing is to turn towards the words or the picture and to really rest with it quietly, almost like a still, quiet noticing of it, and just really see it for what it is, and then feel how it resonates in the body. And then as the thought begins to relax, then go into the body and meet that sensation without the picture on it. If you deal with all that at one time, it can be overwhelming. A picture of a plane crash with an intense anxiety, or a picture of your own death with it, is a lot to deal with because of that velcro effect. It's two things together. Dealing with them separately is a little bit easier, actually, and that's what we do with the inquiries. So we would say, look at that picture of your own death, the actual picture of it. Is that picture itself the threat? If there's a threat in your experience, is the picture it? And they might say yes, because I feel a strong sensation. And we honor the yes. So we would just say, let that picture be there. We honor that looks like a threat. But then eventually we take them just to the feeling by itself without the picture on it after it fades. And we get them to explore that and see if they can find a threat in just the energy without the picture on it. And that's when they start to say no more often. Or there may be some other things to look at that are stuck to that energy. We pull that out. But eventually, when they're meeting that sensation very directly, very presently, without so many words and pictures on it, after they've looked at all that, it's just easier to be with that. And it more easily dissolves at that point.
Mm. Yeah, it's an interesting way of doing it to kind of unpack what we're afraid of into pictures, words, and sensations. And I understand that that's really the essence of the living inquiries.
Yeah, it is. It
Mm-hmm.
is, because that's, what I found in my own experience is generally if I'm suffering with addiction, anxiety, um, anything, if I look, it's right there in front of me. It's in the form of words, pictures, and sensations. And most of the time, I was not looking at it. It was running me. I wasn't aware of it or resting with it. So it seemed to me to be really important just to focus on that, at least for the inquiries, so that we can start looking and being with these things, and even isolating them, so we can. What's it like just to hear the words by themselves, just to hear
Mm-hmm.
that, instead of trying to experience all of it at once.
And I don't know whether you said that already, but when you say words, what you mean is the thought of, you
Yeah,
know,
the thoughts that come in the form of a voice of
yeah,
words like, my life is awful. Yeah,
yes, yes, yeah.
as opposed to pictures. We break thoughts down into words and pictures.
Mm-hmm. Yes, perfect. Yeah. So there's another comment. I'm not sure it's a question also, but I'll just look at it. Bernard says, yes, finding and getting support at painful junctions in one's process is so essential. It can make all the difference in the world, in a person's life and unfolding. So he's just he's agreeing that that support is
One of
really
the,
essential.
and I would agree back with him. And also I would add that, transparency is not something that comes easy to a lot of us, honesty and transparency. But one thing is just to, you know, if we, the one thing when we start getting into the spiritual teachings, if we start to make them very heady and we start repeating things with our mind that actually do not correspond with our actual experience, it may make it hard for us then to ask for help, because we're not, first of all, owning up to what's really happening. So if I say, I all I experience is love, but in our bodies we're experiencing some deep pain that we don't love. So there's an incongruence. There's a dissonance between what we're saying our experience is and what we're actually experiencing. It makes it hard at that point then to ask for help, because we've disconnected from our own experience. We're trying to fool ourselves. So one thing is just to learn how to be transparent with yourself. Just to say, I'm suffering. You know, I don't want to feel this. That's a great start. It's just to say it and then go from there.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's what you're saying about transparency, and is really important. I mean, the first step to recovering can be just to say, I need help. I mean, there has to be.
Yeah, it's the first step in the 12 steps.
Yes.
You know,
Oh, yes, yes, that's right.
just so happens that it applies in other places also.
Yes, yeah, yeah. And it's interesting because I saw somewhere that you're advertising your program as, or you're announcing your program as a program that's not a 12-step program.
Right. It's not a 12-step program. Although we have quite a few 12-steppers who come and do the program, so it's not anti-12-step, it's just not a 12-step program, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how do you think about the 12-step program, and how do you see that in relation to the work that you do?
Because addiction can bring such dire circumstances in people's lives, jails, institutions, and death, I say whatever is helping you, by all means, continue using it. And we ought to be celebrating all the different ways in which addicts are being helped. Um, at the same time, if you close yourself off, if you say, in my experience was, for a while I closed myself off because I needed just to do the 12 steps for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And it helped. It certainly helped.
Mm-hmm.
But it was because I opened myself up to other ideas and other perspectives that I was able to come into this other way. And that can sometimes be one of the best things you can do, is just to kind of move outside of your comfort zone. And that's what I did. And that's what I would invite other people to do, to not necessarily abandon what is working completely, to continue to use what's working, but then venture out to these other approaches that, for me, in the end, meeting everything as it is central to do that. And if I'm not getting that message in the 12-step program, I need to go somewhere else, because
Mm-hmm.
it's just so important for me. You can get it in the 12-step if you have the right sponsor.
Mm-hmm.
You can get it there. Um, but it's been so critical for me that, yeah, as
Yeah.
you know, for you too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have to say, I mean, I had a very good experience in the 12-step group, and I didn't even have a sponsor, but what it did at the time was it helped me let go of the shame, because you're sitting with people who are all dealing with the same issue.
Yeah.
So, and that was just such a relief. And yes, so the shame being so crucial in part of that cycle, it really, I found it very beneficial. And at some point, you can get stuck in the identity as a survivor of whatever it is you're dealing with,
Yeah,
or as an
yeah,
addict. And that's when it's usually helpful to move on. The other thing is that 12-step programs are free, and for people who don't have the means to support themselves through a professional program, it can just be a very wonderful help.
yeah. So we've set up what we call natural rest groups because the mutual support in recovery is pretty much found to be really helpful. And
Yes.
12-step has got a really strong network of that. We
Mhm.
sometimes send our clients at the center to 12-step meetings at night.
Mhm.
Um, but we also have natural rest groups because we understand the power of mutual support. So we send
Yes.
people to these everyday meetings where they can meet with other people doing this kind of work, and it's been shown to be really helpful. And the studies show that it helps just to
Mhm.
be. It just makes sense because addiction is so
Yes.
much about isolation and shame anyway.
Yeah.
Um, kind of being alone and using often.
Mhm.
Being around other people would be helpful.
Yes. Yes. Um, and for people who'd like to know about these natural rest groups, can you give them a website address or some reference where they can find them?
Yeah, when you go to Kiloby.com, you just click on the Natural Rest for Addiction site, and then when you get to that site, under Resources, you'll see NR groups,
Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
Natural Rest groups.
Yeah. Great. So Scott, I'm going to take one last look at the YouTube page. Um, and Klaus says, do you think that it will be possible to work as a practitioner directly in detox? People come out there and immediately fall into the old behavior.
Can you rephrase the
I'm
question
not,
for me?
yeah, I'm not sure exactly what that question is. Do you think that it will be possible to work as a practitioner directly in the detox? People come out there and immediately fall into the old behavior. I think what the question is could you actually go into the detox centers and work there? Because when people come out of detox, they just get back into the addiction because they haven't had the kind of support in dealing with the addiction that they really need to stay clean.
It just depends on, well, first of all, we want to eventually have a detox unit in our center because we can use the inquiries during detox. The anxiety inquiry helps with withdrawal effects, for example. Just
Right.
seeing if there's a threat in any of the sensations, any of the thoughts we've seen it with even with heroin, help people just relax. Um, but it also depends on where a person is in the detox. I mean, sometimes the first few days of detox, they're very sick and you can't really process with them much. They're just a matter of surviving. We like those detox centers that make it comfortable as possible to detox to keep them in the
Yes.
process so that they'll come to our center and not make them want to run out the door.
Mm-hmm.
And there are ways to make it comfortable these days that really a lot of things are happening in the detox world to make it more comfortable for people. And of course, some would say you need it to be uncomfortable so that they'll have a fear of using again, and fine, okay. But we don't really operate on fear here. We don't want to instill more fear in people's lives. We want to free them from the cycle of addiction, not be scared of that.
Yeah. My sense is that scaring people into getting clean is not going to work on the long run. But if people discover they can really be with what is and what happens, what arises inside and outside,
Yes,
there's no need anymore to reach for anything other than what is.
that's a really, really important point. The difference between a fear-driven recovery and one which begs to meet things exactly as they are, including
Mm.
the fear.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. and to, you know, and what helps in that is to also, I think, just to discover the aliveness that's there when we are with what is. I mean, that is what's being alive, you know, that's
Yeah.
what's being fully alive. And it
Yeah.
just feels so good.
Yeah.
Why anybody would not want to be there, you know,
Yeah.
then becomes just like, well, of course I'd want to be there.
Well, yeah.
It's so much, it's just so much more alive. It's so much
Yeah.
more, it just feels so much better. Even
Yeah.
if sometimes it doesn't feel so good, but it's alive.
Yeah. And I think that gets to a point where you realize that, well, the more you're with everything, how painful it is not to be with things, you know?
Yeah.
It becomes even more painful to not face things directly. And that's just, thank God that's there, because, you know, it sort of helps to reinforce the acceptance of everything,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Great. There's one last comment from Bernard that I see, and then I think we're going to wrap up, because I feel that's a great place to end this conversation with. Bernard says, transparency, right, and true enough, often spirituality, tragically enough, actually exacerbates the splitting of reality into good and bad that is already occurring to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Good point. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So, Scott, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. Um, I think people got a lot out of it, and also just maybe a better sense of how, you know, how recovery can be informed by, from addiction, can be informed by a perspective that is so much larger, that's not based on control or fear, you know, controlling your addiction or
Mm-hmm.
being afraid of it and trying to
Willpower.
stay away from it. And, you know, it just has, to me, it has the feel of love. I mean, it just does.
Yeah.
That's me.
Thank you for having me, Greg.
So thank
Appreciate
you,
it.
Scott. And I just wish all the flowering and expansion and to your center and to your own work that you might want to wish for. And may it help many people, may it guide many people into finding life beautiful as it is.
Thank you for your support of our work, because you've been very supportive of our facilitators and my work at the center. I appreciate that very much.
Yeah, well, I really get the value of it, you know. And I find it just beautiful. Mm.
Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you to all of you for listening. And if you'd like to be on the mailing list, go to the Living from Love site, living-from-love.com, and you can put your name down on the mailing list there. And I'd also just like to let you know that there's a retreat, an online retreat coming up in early November. And if you put your name on the mailing list, you'll find out all about it. The theme for the retreat is Awakening as Love, the place of the heart in non-dual teachings. And we have some big names this time. Gangaji, I've already done a pre-recorded session with Gangaji. Muji will be there live. Tim Freak will be there, and various others. So join us then. And goodbye for now.